The repair bay doors of Jaron Cole's workshop hung open to the perpetual twilight of Station Kepler 442. Most mechanics on the outer rim closed shop after the second solar cycle, but Jaron had never been like most mechanics. His calloused hands worked beneath the hull of a cargo hauler, rewiring a burnt-out thruster array when he heard it. A sound that made his blood run cold. A howl. Not human, not mechanical, but something primal that echoed through the metal corridors of the station. Jaron rolled out from under the hauler, grease-stained rag in hand, and froze. Standing in the entrance of his bay was a creature that shouldn't exist outside of xenobiological databases, an alien wolf, easily the size of a small transport vehicle, its fur shimmering with bioluminescent patterns that pulsed like a dying star. But what stopped Jaron's heart wasn't the creature's size or its razor-sharp crystalline teeth. It was the desperation in its eyes. The wolf, Sira, carried something in her massive jaws. Something small and limp. "Easy now," Jaron whispered, raising both hands slowly. His translator implant buzzed, trying to process the low growls emanating from Sira's throat. But the technology wasn't built for this. This was a species humanity had only observed from a distance. Apex predators from the Andromeda frontier who hunted in the void between stars. Sira took a cautious step forward, her 6 legs moving with predatory grace despite the tremor in her movements. She lowered her head and gently placed the small form on Jaron's workshop floor. It was a pup, no larger than a human child, its bioluminescent patterns flickering weakly like a candle in a storm. Jaron's mechanic instincts kicked in before his survival instincts could protest. He dropped to his knees beside the dying pup, his mind racing. The creature's chest barely rose and fell, and a deep gash along its side leaked a luminescent fluid that Jaron assumed was blood. But this wasn't a machine he could fix with a welding torch and spare parts. This was a living being, alien and impossibly fragile. Sira growled again, softer this time. The translator caught fragments. "Help. Young one, trust you. You want me to help?" Jaron asked, meeting the wolf's eyes. They were intelligent, more so than any animal he'd ever encountered. This wasn't instinct driving her, this was a mother's love, transcending species and language. Sira dipped her massive head in what could only be a nod. Jaron's workshop wasn't a medical bay, but he'd spent years jury-rigging solutions from whatever materials he had on hand. If he could keep a fusion reactor from melting down with spare wire and prayer, maybe he could save this pup. He grabbed his portable scanner, the same one he used to diagnose failing systems in starships, and ran it over the small creature. The readings were unlike anything in his database, but patterns emerged. The pup's internal structure resembled a hybrid of organic tissue and something else, crystalline matrices that conducted energy like biological circuitry. The gash had severed one of these matrices, causing a cascade failure in the pup's systems. It was bleeding out, but not just blood. It was losing the energy that kept its exotic biology functioning. "I need to close this wound and reconnect the energy pathways," Jaron muttered, more to himself than to Sira. He rushed to his workbench, gathering tools. A plasma welder set to its lowest setting, medical gel he kept for his own injuries, and conductive wire made from rare earth elements. Sira watched him with unblinking eyes, her massive form coiled tight like a spring. One wrong move, one sign that he meant harm, and she could tear him apart before he could blink. But she didn't. She trusted him, a human, a stranger, a member of a species she had no reason to believe in. Jaron's hands steadied as he worked. He cleaned the wound with antiseptic, applied the medical gel to seal the organic tissue, and then came the delicate part. Using the conductive wire and his plasma welder, he carefully bridged the severed crystalline pathways, treating them like the delicate circuitry of a quantum processor. Sweat dripped down his face as he worked, aware of Sira's hot breath on his neck, aware that one mistake could mean death for the pup, and possibly for him. Minutes felt like hours. The pup's bioluminescence dimmed further, its patterns slowing like a failing heartbeat. Jaron soldered the final connection and held his breath. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, like a surge of power through a dormant system, light flooded back into the pup's patterns. Its chest rose with a deep, shuddering breath, and its eyes, brilliant and alien, fluttered open. The small creature let out a weak but unmistakable sound, something between a chirp and a howl. Sira released a sound Jaron had never heard before, a mixture of relief and joy that transcended species. She lowered her massive head and gently nuzzled her pup, her bioluminescent pattern synchronizing with its own in a display of pure maternal love. Jaren sat back on his heels, exhausted and amazed. His hands were shaking, not from fear but from the weight of what had just happened. An apex predator from another galaxy had brought her dying child to him, a humble mechanic on a forgotten station, and trusted him with the most precious thing in her world. Sira turned to Jaren, and this time the translator caught her words clearly. Debt, honor, pack. Before Jaren could respond, she lifted the pup gently in her jaws and began to back toward the bay doors, but she paused at the threshold, her eyes locking with his one final time. In that gaze, Jaren saw something humanity had been searching for since they'd first reached for the stars. Recognition, respect, and the understanding that compassion wasn't bound by biology or borders. Sira and her pup disappeared into the twilight of the station, leaving Jaren alone in his workshop. He looked down at his hands, still stained with luminescent blood and grease, and smiled. In that moment, he understood what it truly meant to be human. Not the conquerors of the galaxy, not the builders of empires, but the ones who would always stop, who would always help, who would always choose compassion even when faced with the unknown. And somewhere in the vast darkness between stars, a wolf mother would tell her pup the story of the human mechanic who saved her child, and the legend of humanity's kindness would spread to corners of the galaxy they had yet to reach.